The slap echoed through Briarwood Bakery like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to freeze midair, catching dust particles suspended in shock. Eleanor Whitcomb's wire-rimmed glasses flew sideways across her face. Her silver-gray hair, carefully styled that morning, whipped against her cheek. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, her powder blue cardigan twisting around her thin shoulders as she reached for something, anything, to steady herself. She found nothing but air. The man in the leather jacket stood over her, his hands still raised, his face contorted into something ugly. Something triumphant. His white button-down shirt strained against his chest as he breathed hard, like he'd just won a fight instead of struck an 80-year-old woman in broad daylight. "I said move," he spat. The words dripped with contempt, with ownership, with the absolute certainty that he could do whatever he wanted to whoever he wanted. Behind the glass display case, a young clerk named Melissa pressed both hands against her mouth. Her eyes were wet. Her body was shaking, but her feet stayed planted exactly where they were. In the corner booth, a man in a gray blazer sat frozen with a coffee cup halfway to his lips. He'd seen everything. His face had gone pale as milk. But he didn't stand. He didn't speak. He just sat there, watching, like this was something happening on a television screen instead of 3 feet in front of him. The bell above the door hadn't even finished chiming from when the man in the leather jacket had stormed in. 45 seconds. That's all it had taken. 45 seconds for a Thursday morning to turn into something none of them would ever forget. Eleanor's hand went to her cheek. Slowly. Trembling. She could feel the heat blooming across her skin, could feel her pulse pounding against her palm. The taste of copper touched her tongue where she'd bitten the inside of her lip. She looked up at the man standing over her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at him with those steady gray eyes, the same eyes that had watched 3 generations of children learn to read, the same eyes that had dried countless tears and witnessed countless small cruelties in schoolyards and hallways and parking lots. She knew this man. Not his name. Not his face. But his type. She knew exactly what he was. And somewhere deep inside her chest, past the shock and the pain and the humiliation, something else stirred. Something old. Something patient. Something that had been waiting a very long time. The dog moved first. He'd been sitting quietly by Eleanor's feet, so still that most people hadn't even noticed him. An old German shepherd with a gray muzzle and scars on his flank that nobody in the bakery could have explained. His name was Valor, and for the past 3 years, he'd followed Eleanor Whitcomb everywhere she went. Now he was on his feet. His lips pulled back. His teeth caught the morning light. The growl that came from his throat was low and steady and promised violence in a language older than words. The man in the leather jacket took a step backward. His confidence cracked. Just for a moment. Just enough to show the fear underneath. "Call off your dog," he said. His voice had changed. Higher now. Thinner. Eleanor's hand found Valor's head. Her fingers pressed gently against his fur. "Stay," she whispered. The dog stopped. Immediately. Completely. Like someone had flipped a switch. But his eyes never left the man in the leather jacket. And in those eyes was something the man didn't recognize, something that had been forged in places he couldn't imagine, tested in fires he would never understand. The man laughed. It came out wrong. Too loud. Too nervous. "Crazy old woman," he muttered. He grabbed his bag of pastries from the counter, threw a $20 bill down like he was doing everyone a favor, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold, turned back, looked directly at Eleanor, still standing there with her hand on her cheek and her dog pressed against her leg. "People like you," he said, "should learn to stay out of the way." The bell chimed as he left. His black SUV roared to life outside. Tires squealed against pavement. And then he was gone, leaving nothing behind but the smell of expensive cologne and the echo of what he'd done. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Melissa finally found her voice. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I'm so sorry. I should have. I didn't know what to." Eleanor raised her hand. Gentle. Forgiving. "It's all right," she said. But it wasn't all right. And everyone in that bakery knew it. The man in the gray blazer finally set down his coffee cup. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone, stared at it, then put it away again. He hadn't called anyone. He hadn't recorded anything. He just watched. Eleanor lowered herself slowly into the nearest chair. Her knees weren't what they used to be. Her heart was beating too fast. The red mark on her cheek was already starting to swell. Valor settled at her feet. His head rested on her shoe. His eyes finally closed. Outside the window, Hawthorne Bend continued its Thursday morning like nothing had happened. Cars passed. People walked. The flag at the post office fluttered in the breeze. But inside Briarwood Bakery, something had changed. Something had broken. And something else was about to begin. Eleanor reached down and stroked Valor's head. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she whispered. The dog's ear twitched. His tail gave one slow thump against the floor. What nobody in that bakery knew, what the man in the leather jacket couldn't possibly have guessed, was that they'd all just become part of a story that was about to get much, much bigger. Because in the back booth, sitting alone with a half-eaten muffin, a 17-year-old girl named Destiny Carter had done something that no one else had thought to do. She'd held up her phone. And she'd pressed record. The video was already 47 seconds long. It captured everything. The slap. The scream. The dog's teeth flashing in the light. The old woman's dignity. The man's cruelty. All of it. Destiny's finger hovered over the screen. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was racing. She could delete it. Pretend she'd never seen anything. Go back to her regular Thursday morning life. Or she could do something else. Something that would change everything. Her thumb moved toward the share button. And somewhere across town, in an office with oak-paneled walls and photographs of ribbon cuttings and civic ceremonies, a phone was about to ring with news that would bring a powerful man to his knees. Because the woman who'd just been slapped in Briarwood Bakery wasn't just some random elderly widow. She was Eleanor Whitcomb. And there was a reason that name meant something in this town. But what did she do? Who exactly was waiting to hear what happened? And what would the man in the leather jacket discover when he found out who he'd really just attacked? If you've ever witnessed someone powerful abuse their position and wished the world would find out the truth, then you already know exactly where this story is headed. But first, you need to understand something about the dog that never left Eleanor's side. Because Valor wasn't always an old German shepherd dozing by an elderly woman's feet. And the scars on his body told a story that most people in Hawthorne Bend had never heard. A story about war. About sacrifice. And about a promise made to a dying soldier 10,000 miles away. Valor's paws still remembered the sand. Hot sand. Sharp sand. Sand that got into everything, into wounds and eyes and the spaces between teeth. Sand that turned red when men fell and never got back up. The old dog lay at Eleanor's feet in the bakery, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere with different smells. Different sounds. Different screams. 3 years ago, Valor had worn a different collar. A tactical harness with a badge number stitched into black canvas. K-9 Unit. United States Army. Handler, Sergeant Caleb Whitcomb. Caleb had found him in a training facility in Kentucky when Valor was barely 2 years old. Most dogs washed out of the program. Too nervous. Too aggressive. Too easily distracted by sounds and smells and the chaos of combat simulation. Valor was different. He worked in silence. Followed hand signals with mechanical precision. Located explosives buried under 18 inches of packed earth. Tracked enemy combatants through terrain that would have killed lesser animals. And when things went wrong, when the bullets started flying and men started screaming and the world turned into fire and noise, Valor didn't run. He stayed. That's what made him special. That's what made him Caleb's. They deployed together to Afghanistan in the summer. Hot season. Dust storms that blotted out the sun. Patrols through villages where every doorway could hide a rifle, every pile of garbage could hide a bomb. Caleb was 26 years old. Sandy hair that bleached almost white in the sun. A laugh that came easy and often, even in places where laughter seemed impossible. He wrote letters home to his grandmother every week, long letters filled with bad jokes and optimistic lies. "Everything's fine here, Grandma." Valor says hi. He's getting fat because the guys keep sneaking him beef jerky. I'll be home before you know it. The letters stopped coming in September. Not because Caleb stopped writing. He wrote one every single week, right up until the end. But the mail got delayed, backed up, lost in the chaos of a war that was supposed to be winding down but somehow kept finding new ways to take young men away from the people who loved them. The ambush happened on a Tuesday. Caleb's patrol was moving through a narrow valley when the first shots rang out. Automatic weapons fire from 3 directions. Men dropped. Men scattered. Men called out for help that couldn't reach them fast enough. Valor was off-leash when it started. He'd been scouting ahead, clearing the path, doing what he'd been trained to do. When the shooting began, every instinct told him to find cover. To survive. To wait for the noise to stop. Instead, he ran toward the sound of Caleb's voice. The valley was chaos. Smoke everywhere. Blood on the rocks. Men crawling through the dirt with wounds that would kill them in minutes if someone didn't get to them first. Valor found Caleb pinned behind a boulder, his leg torn open from shrapnel, his rifle jammed with sand. 2 other soldiers were down nearby, one unconscious, one screaming. The dog didn't hesitate. He grabbed the unconscious soldier's vest in his teeth and dragged. 80 pounds of dead weight through 50 feet of open ground while bullets tore up the earth around him. He got the man behind the boulder. Then he went back for the other one. A round caught him in the flank on the second trip. The impact spun him sideways. He stumbled. He bled. He kept going. By the time air support arrived, Valor had pulled 3 men to safety. His paws were burned from hot shell casings. His side was torn open. His fur was matted with blood that wasn't all his own. Caleb was still alive when the helicopter came. Barely. Clinging to consciousness by sheer stubbornness, his hand wrapped around Valor's collar, refusing to let go. "Don't you leave me," he whispered. "Don't you dare leave me." Valor pressed his head against Caleb's chest. He didn't leave. The helicopter flew them both to a field hospital in Bagram. Surgeons worked on Caleb for 9 hours. Veterinarians worked on Valor in a tent nearby. Caleb died on the operating table at 3:47 in the morning. His heart just stopped. The doctors tried everything. Defibrillators. Drugs. Manual compression. Nothing worked. He was 26 years old. When the news reached the tent where Valor was recovering, the dog lifted his head. Just once. Then he put it back down on his paws and stared at the canvas wall with eyes that seemed to understand exactly what had happened. He didn't eat for 3 days after that. Didn't move except when the veterinarians forced him to. Didn't make a sound. The army wanted to put him back in service. He was too valuable to retire. Too well trained. Too effective. But something had broken inside him. Something that couldn't be fixed with surgery or medication or time. He still followed commands. Still cleared buildings. Still located explosives with mechanical precision. But the fire was gone. The drive. The thing that had made him run toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it. He was just going through the motions now. A machine without a soul. The paperwork for his decommissioning came through 6 months later. Medical retirement. A dog with his service record was entitled to placement with a civilian family, preferably one with military connections. The army made phone calls. Sent letters. Most people said no. An elderly German shepherd with combat trauma wasn't exactly a popular adoption choice. Then someone called Eleanor Whitcomb, Caleb's grandmother, the woman who'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 7. The woman who'd read him bedtime stories and bandaged his scraped knees and cried at his high school graduation and cried again when he enlisted. The woman who was still waiting for letters that would never come. "We have his dog," the army representative said. Sergeant Whitcomb's K-9 partner. "He's not doing well. He needs a home. We thought you might want to." Eleanor said yes before the man could finish his sentence. She didn't ask about the medical issues. Didn't ask about the behavioral problems. Didn't ask about the nightmares that made Valor howl in the middle of the night. She just said yes. Because that dog was the last living piece of her grandson. The last thing Caleb had loved. The last thing that had heard his voice, felt his hand, shared his final moments. She would have walked through fire to bring that dog home. 3 weeks later, a military transport van pulled up to Eleanor's small house on Maple Street. Two soldiers helped an old German shepherd down the ramp. He walked slowly, carefully. His flank was still wrapped in bandages. His eyes were dull and distant. Eleanor was waiting on the porch. She didn't rush toward him, didn't reach out to pet him, didn't make any sudden movements. She just sat in her rocking chair and waited. Valor stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. His nose twitched. His ears went forward. He smelled something. Something familiar. Something that cut through 3 years of war and trauma and loss. He smelled Caleb. Not Caleb himself, but traces of him. In the wood of the house. In the fabric of the furniture. In the skin and clothes of the old woman sitting 10 feet away. Valor climbed the steps. One at a time. Slow and careful. He stopped in front of Eleanor's chair. Looked up at her with those old, tired eyes. And for the first time since Caleb died, his tail wagged. Just once. Just barely. But it was enough. Eleanor reached down and touched his head. Her fingers were gentle. Her voice was soft. "Welcome home," she said. The soldiers watched from the van. One of them wiped his eyes. They drove away a few minutes later, leaving behind an elderly widow and a broken war dog sitting together on a porch in small-town Ohio. That was 3 years ago. Since then, Valor had followed Eleanor everywhere. To the grocery store. To the post office. To Thursday morning trips to Briarwood Bakery. He didn't howl at night anymore. He ate his food. He let Eleanor brush his fur and clean his ears and tell him stories about Caleb when he was young. But he never stopped scanning corners. Never stopped positioning himself between Eleanor and doorways. Never stopped watching strangers with those alert, assessing eyes. The war was over, but the soldier inside him never fully stood down. And now, lying on the floor of Briarwood Bakery with Eleanor's hand resting on his head, Valor's instincts were screaming. The man in the leather jacket. The one who'd struck Eleanor. The one who'd walked out like he owned the world. Valor had watched his hands the entire time. Tracked his movements. Memorized his scent. Dogs don't forget. Not dogs like him. And somewhere in Valor's scarred and weary brain, a switch had flipped. A target had been acquired. Eleanor didn't know it yet. The people in the bakery didn't know it. The man in the leather jacket certainly didn't know it. But something had just been set in motion. Something that couldn't be stopped. Eleanor squeezed Valor's ear gently. "Let's go home," she said. The dog rose to his feet. Bull bones. Stiff joints. But steady. Always steady. They walked toward the door together, the widow and the war dog, while Melissa watched them go with tears still wet on her cheeks and guilt already gnawing at her conscience. Outside, the black SUV was long gone. But its driver had left something behind. A receipt. Crumpled on the sidewalk. Blown loose from his pocket when he'd fumbled for his keys. Valor's nose found it immediately. A name. An address. A phone number. The old dog didn't pick it up. Didn't need to. He'd already memorized everything that mattered. And as Eleanor opened the passenger door of her old sedan and helped him climb inside, Valor took one last look at the bakery through the window. His eyes found the teenager in the back booth. The one with the phone. The one who was still staring at her screen with shaking hands. Their eyes met. Just for a moment. Then Eleanor started the car, and they pulled away from the curb, and the bakery disappeared behind them. But the story was just beginning. Because in 36 hours, that receipt on the sidewalk would be found. That video on the teenager's phone would be shared. And the man in the leather jacket would discover that some mistakes can never be taken back. What exactly had Valor sensed about that man? What did the receipt reveal? And why would a simple Thursday morning assault become the most talked about event in Hawthorne Bend's history? The black SUV pulled into the reserved parking space at 9:47 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after the slap that would end Derek Halvorson's career. He didn't know that yet, of course. He was still riding the high. Still feeling powerful. Still replaying the look on that old woman's face when his palm connected with her cheek. Fear. That's what he'd seen in her eyes. Fear and surprise and helplessness. It felt good. It always felt good, putting people in their place. Derek grabbed his bag of croissants from the passenger seat and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Brown hair, expensively styled. Strong jaw, cleanly shaved. Eyes that conveyed exactly the right amount of confidence and contempt. He looked like a man who got things done. A man who didn't take no for an answer. A man who'd turned a failing real estate company into a regional powerhouse in just 18 months. That's what the business magazine said, anyway. Derek Halvorson, the developer who's reshaping small-town America. They'd run his photo on the cover. They'd called him a visionary. What they didn't mention was the contractors he'd stiffed. The zoning officials he'd bribed. The families he'd displaced from properties his company purchased through shell corporations and legal loopholes. What they didn't mention was the trail of broken promises and ruined lives that stretched from Columbus to Cincinnati to every small town unfortunate enough to catch his attention. Derek had arrived in Hawthorne Bend 2 years ago with a plan. Buy up the waterfront properties. Demolish the old buildings. Build luxury condominiums and boutique hotels and restaurants that charged $40 for a steak. Some people loved him. The Chamber of Commerce. The real estate agents. The politicians who saw campaign donations in their future. Other people hated him. The shop owners facing tripled rents. The families watching their neighborhoods transform into places they couldn't afford. The old-timers who remembered when Hawthorne Bend was a community instead of an investment opportunity. Derek didn't care about any of them. The lovers or the haters. They were all just obstacles or assets, pieces to be moved around on a board game only he understood. This morning, the old woman in the bakery had been an obstacle. A small one, barely worth his attention. But she'd been in his way, and he was late for a meeting, and she'd looked at him with those steady gray eyes like she had every right to stand where she was standing. Like she was his equal. The thought made him laugh as he climbed out of his SUV. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant, meeting pushed to 10:30. Henderson wants to review the waterfront projections again. Derek typed back, fine. I'll be in my office. His office occupied the entire top floor of the old Hawthorne building, a 5-story brick structure on Main Street that had once housed a department store. Derek had bought it for a song when the previous owner went bankrupt. Now it was the headquarters of Halvorson Development Group, complete with exposed brick walls, reclaimed wood floors, and windows that offered a panoramic view of everything Derek intended to own. He took the elevator up. The receptionist wished him good morning. His assistant handed him a stack of messages. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. The old woman was already forgotten. Just another anonymous face in a town full of anonymous faces. Another nobody who didn't matter, who would never matter, who would spend the rest of her life being nobody in a nothing town while Derek Halvorson reshaped the world according to his vision. He settled into his leather chair, opened his laptop, and started reviewing the waterfront projections. 3 miles away, Eleanor Whitcomb was sitting at her kitchen table with an ice pack pressed against her cheek. The swelling wasn't bad. She'd been hit harder before, back in her teaching days when a troubled student had lashed out and caught her across the face. That one had left a bruise for 2 weeks. This would fade faster. The physical mark, anyway. The other kind of mark, the kind that left no visible trace, would take longer. Valor lay at her feet, his head resting on her slippers. Every few minutes, he'd look up at her with those worried brown eyes, like he was checking to make sure she was still there. She was still there. Still breathing. Still processing what had happened. Eleanor Whitcomb had lived in Hawthorne Bend for all of her 78 years. She'd been born in the hospital on Oak Street, back when it was still called Mercy General. She'd attended elementary school in the old building on 4th Avenue, the one they'd torn down to build a parking garage. She'd married Robert Whitcomb in the Methodist church on the town square, and she'd buried him in the cemetery behind it 31 years later. She'd raised one child in this town. A daughter named Catherine who'd grown up and moved away and gotten married and had children of her own in a suburb of Chicago. She'd raised one grandchild in this town. A boy named Caleb who'd come to live with her when he was 7 years old, after his parents died in a car accident on a rainy night in October. She'd taught in this town for 42 years. 3rd grade. Room 104 at Jefferson Elementary. The same room, the same desk, the same chalkboard for 4 decades. She'd watched generations pass through that classroom. The children of children. The grandchildren of grandchildren. She taught them to read and write and think. She dried their tears and bandaged their scraped knees and told them they could be anything they wanted to be. Some of them had believed her. Some of them had become doctors and lawyers and teachers of their own. Some of them had become firefighters and nurses and police officers and soldiers. Some of them had died too young, in wars or accidents or from the slow poison of drugs that had found their way into small towns all across America. Eleanor remembered all of them. Every name. Every face. Every story. And she remembered the ones who needed extra help. The ones who struggled. The ones who came to school hungry or bruised or so scared of their own homes that they couldn't focus on their books. She remembered a boy named Franklin who'd shown up in her classroom 45 years ago with patches on his jeans and shame in his eyes. Franklin couldn't read. Not a word. His previous teachers had passed him along, hoping someone else would fix the problem. His parents were too busy or too drunk or too overwhelmed to notice. But Eleanor noticed. She kept him after school. Every day. For 6 months. Sat with him at her desk while the other children went home. Sounded out words letter by letter. Celebrated every small victory. Refused to give up when he wanted to quit. By the end of 3rd grade, Franklin Rowe could read. Not just simple words. Real books. Chapter books. Books with stories that took him to places far away from his patches and his shame and his cramped house on the wrong side of town. He'd cried the day school let out for summer. Actual tears. Because he didn't want to leave. "You'll be back in September," Eleanor had told him. "And you'll be in 4th grade. And you'll be ready." He'd hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. 45 years later, Franklin Rowe was the mayor of Hawthorne Bend. Eleanor had voted for him in every election. Had watched him grow from that scared, struggling boy into a man who actually cared about his community. Had felt a quiet pride every time she saw his name in the newspaper or his face on a campaign poster. He still called her Mrs. Whitcomb. Still visited her on holidays. Still sent her cards on her birthday and flowers on Mother's Day. She'd never asked him for anything. Never reminded him of what she'd done. Never expected special treatment or public recognition. That wasn't why she'd helped him. That wasn't why she'd helped any of them. She'd helped them because they needed helping. Because that's what teachers did. Because every child deserved someone who believed in them. Now Eleanor sat in her kitchen with an ice pack on her face and a war dog at her feet, and she thought about the man who'd hit her. She didn't know his name. Didn't know his story. Didn't know what had happened in his life to turn him into someone who would strike an elderly woman in a bakery for the crime of standing in line. But she knew his type. She'd seen boys like him in her classroom. Boys who took what they wanted. Boys who hurt smaller children when no one was watching. Boys who grew up to be men who still took what they wanted and still hurt smaller people when no one was watching. Some of them changed. With help. With patience. With someone who refused to give up on them. Others didn't change. They just got better at hiding what they were. Eleanor wondered which type this man was. Then she stopped wondering and started thinking about something else. The look in his eyes when Valor had bared his teeth. The way his voice had changed. Higher. Thinner. Afraid. He wasn't invincible. He just thought he was. And sometimes, the universe had a way of correcting that kind of thinking. Eleanor set down the ice pack and reached for the phone. Not to call the police. Not yet. Maybe not at all. She called her daughter in Chicago instead. "Mom." Catherine's voice was thick with sleep. "The time difference." Eleanor always forgot about the time difference. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Eleanor said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." They talked for 20 minutes. About the grandchildren. About Catherine's job. About the weather, which was always different in Chicago than it was in Hawthorne Bend. Eleanor didn't mention the bakery. Didn't mention the slap. Didn't mention the man in the leather jacket or the dog that had almost torn him apart. Some things a mother kept to herself. After she hung up, Eleanor made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the street. Valor watched with her. His ears forward. His eyes alert. Something was coming. They both could feel it. The old dog's nose twitched. His tail gave one slow thump against the floor. He knew something Eleanor didn't. The receipt. The one that had fallen from the man's pocket. The one with his name and address printed in neat black letters. Valor hadn't forgotten. And somewhere across town, in an office with exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood floors, Derek Halvorsen was about to get a phone call that would change everything. The phone on his desk rang at exactly 11:15 a.m. He answered without looking at the caller ID. Halvorsen. A pause on the other end. Then a voice he didn't recognize. Mr. Halvorsen? This is Mayor Rowe's office. The mayor would like to see you immediately. Derek frowned. He didn't have time for political nonsense today. He had projections to review, contracts to sign, a waterfront to transform. Tell him I'll call back this afternoon. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Halvorsen, I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. The line went dead. Derek stared at the phone in his hand. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody. He was still sitting there, still seething, when his assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Halvorsen? There's something you should see. She was holding her phone. Her face was pale. On the screen, a video was playing. 47 seconds long. Shot from a distance. Slightly shaky, but clear enough. Clear enough to show a man in a leather jacket slapping an elderly woman in a bakery. Clear enough to show his face. Clear enough to ruin everything. The video already had 12,000 views. By noon, it would have 100,000. By evening, it would have more. Derek Halvorsen watched himself strike Eleanor Whitcomb across the face. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something he barely recognized. Who had recorded that video? How had it spread so fast? And what would happen when the whole town discovered who Derek Halvorsen had really attacked? The mayor's office smelled like old books and furniture polish. Franklin Rowe stood behind his desk with both hands pressed flat against the oak surface. His knuckles were white. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. He'd watched the video 17 times. 17 times, he'd seen that man's hand connect with Eleanor Whitcomb's face. 17 times, he'd seen her glasses fly sideways. 17 times, he'd seen her stumble backward with shock and pain written across features he'd known for 45 years. Mrs. Whitcomb. His Mrs. Whitcomb. The woman who'd stayed after school with him every single day for 6 months. The woman who'd taught him that he wasn't stupid, wasn't worthless, wasn't destined to become nothing like everyone else seemed to think. The woman who'd changed his life. Franklin was 60 years old now. He had gray hair and reading glasses and a bad knee that ached when it rained. He had 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren and a wife who still laughed at his terrible jokes after 37 years of marriage. He had all of that because Eleanor Whitcomb had refused to give up on a scared little boy who couldn't read. And now some stranger had walked into a bakery and slapped her like she was nothing. The door opened. Derek Halvorsen stepped inside. He was wearing a charcoal suit now. Expensive. Perfectly tailored. His leather jacket had been replaced with something more professional, more appropriate for a meeting with a public official. He'd also composed his face into an expression of concerned confusion. Like he had no idea why he'd been summoned. Like this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Mayor Rowe. Derek extended his hand. I came as soon as I could. What's this about? Franklin didn't take the hand. He didn't offer a seat. He didn't say a single word for a long, uncomfortable moment. Derek's hand hung in the air. His smile flickered. The confident mask slipped, just slightly, just enough to show something uglier underneath. Is there a problem? Derek asked. He lowered his hand, adjusted his cuffs, tried to look casual. Franklin finally spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that made the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. Do you know who Eleanor Whitcomb is? Derek blinked. The name meant nothing to him. Why would it? The old woman in the bakery was just an old woman in a bakery. A nobody. A nothing. I don't think so, he said carefully. Should I? Franklin moved around the desk. Slowly. Deliberately. His bad knee protested, but he ignored it. He stopped 3 feet from Derek and looked him straight in the eyes. She taught me how to read. Silence. Derek's expression shifted. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "The woman this morning," he said. "In the bakery. Her name is Eleanor Whitcomb. I didn't know. She taught my mother how to read. She taught my daughter how to read. She spent 42 years in a third-grade classroom teaching every child who walked through her door that they mattered, that they were worth something, that they could be anything they wanted to be." Franklin's voice cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. She bought school supplies with her own money. She paid for lunches when parents couldn't afford them. She stayed late and came early and gave everything she had to children who weren't even her own. Derek opened his mouth to speak. Franklin didn't let him. "She's 78 years old. She weighs 112 pounds. She has arthritis in both hands and a heart condition that requires medication 3 times a day. And you hit her." The words landed like physical blows. Derek took a step backward. His heel caught on the edge of the carpet. He stumbled but caught himself. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. His voice had changed. Higher. Thinner. The same voice he'd used in the bakery when Valor had bared his teeth. "She was in my way. I was late. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what? Slap an elderly woman in front of a dozen witnesses? Humiliate her in public? Call her, what was it again?" Franklin pulled out his phone. Pressed play. The video filled the small screen. Derek's voice came through the speaker, tinny but perfectly clear. "People like you should learn to stay out of the way." Franklin stopped the video. Set the phone on his desk. 300,000 views, he said. "In 2 hours. By tonight, it'll be on the national news. By tomorrow, your name will be synonymous with everything wrong with this country." Derek's face had gone pale. His confident mask was completely gone now, replaced by something raw and desperate. "I can fix this," he said. "I'll apologize. I'll pay her. I'll donate to whatever charity she wants. You'll what? Make it go away? Buy your way out like you've bought your way out of everything else." Franklin moved closer. His voice dropped even lower. "Let me tell you something about Eleanor Whitcomb. She doesn't want your money. She doesn't want your apology. She doesn't want anything from you at all." He paused. Let the words sink in. "But I want something." Derek's eyes widened. He knew what was coming. The shakedown. The political leverage. The deal that would cost him money and power and maybe a piece of his company. He was already calculating. Already planning. Already figuring out how much this would cost and how to minimize the damage. Franklin saw the calculation happening. Watched it play across Derek's face like subtitles in a foreign film. And something inside him snapped. "You still don't get it, do you?" He grabbed Derek's arm. Pulled him toward the window that overlooked Main Street. "Look out there. Look at those people." Derek looked. He saw what he always saw. A small town. Small people. Small businesses that would eventually be replaced by his developments. Small lives that would eventually be improved by his vision. "Those people know Eleanor Whitcomb," Franklin said. "They know what she did for their children. They know what she did for their grandchildren. They know what she's given to this community for half a century." His grip tightened. "And now they've all seen that video. They've all seen you slap her. They've all heard you call her something that should learn to stay out of the way." Derek tried to pull away. Franklin didn't let him. "You wanted to build condominiums on the waterfront. You wanted to transform this town into something profitable. You wanted to be remembered as the man who put Hawthorne Bend on the map." Franklin released his arm. "Congratulations, Mr. Halvorson. You're going to be remembered. Just not the way you planned." Derek rubbed his arm where Franklin's fingers had left marks. "You can't do anything to me," he said. But his voice was shaking now. His confidence was draining away like water from a cracked cup. "I have lawyers. I have contracts. You have nothing." Franklin walked back to his desk, picked up a folder, opened it. "The zoning variance you requested for the waterfront development? Denied. The tax incentive package you negotiated with the council? Under review. The building permits you filed last month? Suspended pending investigation." Derek's mouth opened. Opened again. You can't. I'm the mayor. I can do a lot of things. Franklin closed the folder. But here's what I can't do. I can't make that video disappear. I can't make people forget what they saw. I can't undo what you did to a woman who dedicated her entire life to making this town better. He set the folder down. And I can't protect you from what's coming. Derek's phone buzzed. Then again. Then again. Messages piling up. Voicemails accumulating. The outside world crashing through the walls of the mayor's office. You should probably answer that, Franklin said. I suspect it's the beginning of a very long day. Derek pulled out his phone. His hand was trembling. 12 missed calls. 27 text messages. 4 voicemails from numbers he didn't recognize. And an email from his lawyer with a subject line that made his stomach drop. Urgent. Media inquiry assault video. Call immediately. Derek looked up from his phone. His face was gray. His eyes were wild. This isn't over, he said. But it sounded like a question. Franklin walked to the door. Opened it. No, he said. It's just beginning. Derek stumbled out of the office. Down the hallway. Past the receptionist who wouldn't meet his eyes. Out into the street where people were already gathering, already pointing, already recognizing the face they'd seen in the video. Behind him, the door to the mayor's office closed with a soft click. Franklin stood alone in the silence. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding. He'd done what needed to be done. Said what needed to be said. But it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to erase the image of Eleanor Whitcomb's face as that man's hand connected with her cheek. Franklin sat down at his desk, picked up his phone, dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang 3 times before she answered. Hello. Her voice. The same voice that had patiently sounded out letters with him 45 years ago. The same voice that had told him he could be anything he wanted to be. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. It's Franklin. The pause. Then a soft laugh. Franklin Rowe. I was wondering when you'd call. I just met with him. The man who... I know. Of course she knew. She always knew everything that happened in this town. He's finished, Franklin said. His projects, his reputation, everything. By this time tomorrow he'll be... Franklin. He stopped. Come have dinner with me tonight. Bring your wife. We'll talk. He blinked. That wasn't what he expected. Mrs. Whitcomb, are you okay? Another pause. Longer this time. I've been hit before, Franklin. By students who were hurting. By life, which doesn't care how old or tired you are. This isn't the first time, and it probably won't be the last. Her voice softened. What matters is what happens next. What we do with the pain. How we turn it into something better. Franklin felt tears prick at his eyes. 60 years old and she could still make him cry. 6 o'clock, she said. Don't be late. The line went dead. Franklin set down his phone. Wiped his eyes. Took a deep breath. Outside his window, the town of Hawthorne Bend was waking up to something it hadn't felt in a long time. A shared purpose. A collective anger. A determination to stand up for one of their own. But there was more coming. Things Franklin didn't know about yet. Things about the dog that never left Eleanor's side. Things about what that dog had done, and who that dog had saved, and why the scars on his body told a story that connected Eleanor Whitcomb to Franklin Rowe in ways neither of them fully understood. The video had started something. But the truth about Valor would finish it. What did the mayor not know about his own family's connection to Eleanor's dog? What would he discover when veterans started gathering outside City Hall? And why would the next 24 hours change Hawthorne Bend forever? Nobody stopped him. That was the part Eleanor couldn't forget. She sat in her living room as the afternoon light faded, Valor pressed against her legs, and she played the scene over and over in her mind. The bakery. The slap. The moment afterward when everyone just stood there. Melissa behind the counter with her hands over her mouth. The man in the gray blazer frozen in his booth. The other customers scattered around the room like statues in a museum. None of them moved. None of them spoke. None of them did anything except watch while a stranger struck an old woman and walked away. Eleanor understood fear. She'd spent 42 years working with children, and children were excellent teachers when it came to fear. They feared monsters under beds and darkness in closets and the sound of raised voices behind closed doors. They feared being different, being noticed, being the one who stood out from the crowd. Most of all, they feared being hurt. The adults were the same really, just better at hiding it. The people in that bakery had been afraid. Afraid of the man in the leather jacket. Afraid of getting involved. Afraid of what might happen if they stepped forward and tried to help. Fear traveled faster than courage. It always had. It always would. Eleanor didn't blame them. Not really. But she couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if just one person had stepped forward. If just one voice had said stop. If just one hand had reached out to steady her before she stumbled. Would it have changed anything? Would the man have paused, reconsidered, walked away before his palm connected with her face? Or would he have done it anyway, in front of God and everyone, because he believed he could do whatever he wanted to whoever he wanted? Eleanor didn't know the answer. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Valor's head lifted. His ears swiveled toward the front door. A moment later, Eleanor heard it too. Footsteps on her porch. The creak of old wood under unfamiliar weight. She wasn't expecting anyone. The doorbell rang. Valor stood. His body shifted into a posture Eleanor recognized from their walks through town, from the moments when strangers approached too quickly or too loudly. Alert. Ready. Waiting for her signal. Easy, she murmured. She walked to the door. Looked through the peephole. A young woman stood on the porch. 17, maybe 18. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Eyes that were red-rimmed and swollen. Eleanor recognized her from the bakery. The girl in the back booth. The one with the phone. She opened the door. Mrs. Whitcomb? The girl's voice cracked. I'm Destiny. Destiny Carter. I was there this morning. At Briarwood. Eleanor nodded slowly. I remember. Destiny's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I should have done something. I should have said something. I just sat there and watched and I didn't. She broke off. Couldn't finish. Eleanor stepped onto the porch. Took the girl's hands in her own. Come inside, she said. I'll make us some tea. They sat in the kitchen. Valor settled at Eleanor's feet, his eyes tracking the newcomer with careful attention. Destiny held her cup but didn't drink. Her hands were still shaking. I recorded it, she said finally. The whole thing. On my phone. Eleanor nodded. She'd heard about the video by now. Half the town had seen it. I didn't know what to do, Destiny continued. I was scared. He was so angry and you were on the ground, and the dog was growling and I just sat there. She looked up. Met Eleanor's eyes. But then I thought about what my grandma would say. She was like you. A teacher. 4th grade. She always said that doing nothing is the same as picking a side. Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. She sounds wise. She passed away last year. Destiny wiped her eyes. Cancer. But I keep thinking about her, about what she'd want me to do. And I think she'd want me to tell the truth. Eleanor squeezed the girl's hands. You did tell the truth. That video has been seen by thousands of people. Maybe millions by now. But I didn't stop him. The words came out raw. Broken. I had a phone in my hand. I could have called the police. I could have yelled at him. I could have done something besides just recording. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Do you know what I remember most about my students? Not the brilliant ones. Not the troublemakers. Not the ones who went on to do important things. She paused. I remember the ones who tried. The ones who failed and got back up. The ones who made mistakes and learned from them. Destiny was crying again. Silent tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the kitchen table. You made a choice this morning, Eleanor said. Maybe not the perfect choice. But you made one. And now you're here, sitting in my kitchen, carrying that weight. She released Destiny's hands. Reached for her own cup of tea. That weight is called conscience. It means you're human. It means you care. Destiny stared at her. How can you be so... after what he did to you? Eleanor considered the question. I've been alive for 78 years, child. I've seen good people do bad things and bad people do good things. I've watched the world change in ways I never expected and stay the same in ways that break my heart. She sipped her tea. One man slapped me in a bakery. It hurt. It was humiliating. But it doesn't define me. It doesn't erase the life I've lived or the people I've loved or the children I've taught. Her voice hardened, just slightly. It defines him. And he'll have to carry that weight for the rest of his life. Destiny was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, held it up. 3 million views, she said. And climbing. The number hung in the air between them. People are angry, Destiny continued. Like really angry. There's a hashtag trending. Something about justice for you. And there's talk of protests and boycotts and... She trailed off. Do you want it to stop? She asked. The video, I could take it down. I could delete it. If you want, I could make all of this go away. Eleanor looked at the screen. Looked at the number. Looked at the face of the girl who was offering to undo what she'd done. 3 million people had seen that video. 3 million people had watched a man strike an elderly woman in a bakery. 3 million people were angry. Demanding justice. Eleanor thought about the children she'd taught. The ones who'd grown up and moved away and forgotten her name. The ones who'd stayed and raised families and passed through her classroom generation after generation. She thought about Franklin Rowe, that scared little boy who couldn't read, now sitting in the mayor's office trying to protect her. She thought about Caleb, her grandson, buried in a cemetery 6,000 miles from the sand where he'd taken his last breath. She thought about Valor, lying at her feet, the scars on his body mapping a history of violence and courage and love. And she made a decision. No, she said. Don't take it down. Destiny blinked. Are you sure? I'm sure. Eleanor set down her cup. That video shows the truth. It shows what happens when people think they can do whatever they want without consequences. It shows who we are when we think no one is watching. She met Destiny's eyes. Some truths need to be seen. Even the ugly ones. Especially the ugly ones. Destiny nodded slowly. Put away her phone. My grandma would have liked you, she said. Eleanor smiled. I think I would have liked her too. They talked for another hour. About Destiny's grandmother. About college applications and career dreams and all the possibilities that stretched out ahead of a 17-year-old girl in a small Ohio town. By the time Destiny left, the sun had set and the street lamps had flickered on and Valor had fallen asleep with his head on Eleanor's foot. Eleanor walked the girl to the door. Watched her climb into an old Honda and drive away into the darkness. Then she stood on her porch and looked out at the town she'd lived in for 78 years. The lights were coming on in houses up and down the street. Families settling in for dinner. Children finishing homework. Old couples watching the evening news. Normal life. Ordinary life. The kind of life that kept spinning regardless of what happened in bakeries or went viral on the internet. But something had shifted. Eleanor could feel it in the air. Could sense it in the way her neighbors had waved to her earlier, their eyes holding something new. Something fierce. They knew. They all knew. And they were angry. Not just about the slap. Not just about the video. But about everything it represented. The powerful preying on the powerless. The loud trampling the quiet. The bullies who walked through life taking whatever they wanted and leaving wreckage behind. Eleanor had spent 42 years teaching children that words had power. That truth mattered. That standing up for what was right was more important than staying safe. Now the town was learning that lesson all over again. And somewhere, in an expensive office with exposed brick walls, Derek Halvorson was discovering what it felt like to be on the wrong side of that lesson. Valor stirred at her feet. His nose twitched. His ears went forward. Eleanor heard it a moment later. Engines. Multiple engines. Coming from the direction of downtown. She walked to the edge of her porch and looked toward Main Street. Headlights were moving through the darkness. Not cars. Motorcycles. A dozen of them at least, riding in formation, their chrome catching the street lights. They turned onto Maple Street. Slowed as they approached her house. The lead rider pulled to a stop at her curb, killed his engine, removed his helmet. An old man, 70 at least, face weathered by time and sun, eyes that had seen things Eleanor couldn't imagine. On his leather vest, patches. Military patches. Veteran patches. He walked up her front path, stopped at the bottom of her porch steps. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" She nodded. The man looked down at Valor. His face changed. Something passed through his eyes. Recognition. Respect. "I served with your grandson," he said. "Sergeant Caleb Whitcomb. 3rd Battalion. Afghanistan." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "I was there," the man continued. "The day he died. The day that dog saved my life." He reached into his vest, pulled out something small and metal. A medal. Bronze with a ribbon attached. "Caleb earned this," he said. "They mailed it to you after he passed. But it belongs to someone else." He crouched down, looked Valor in the eyes. "This is the soldier's medal," he said, "for acts of heroism not involving conflict with an enemy. Valor earned it when he dragged me and 2 other men to safety under fire." He held out the medal. Valor's nose twitched. He sniffed the medal. Then he did something Eleanor had never seen him do with a stranger. He licked the old man's hand. The veteran's eyes filled with tears. "We heard about what happened," he said, standing up. "At the bakery. The videos everywhere. And when we found out who you were, who Valor was." He turned and gestured to the motorcycles lined up at the curb. "We had to come." Eleanor looked past him. At the riders. At their vests and patches and weathered faces. Men and women who'd served. Who'd fought. Who understood sacrifice. "What are you going to do?" she asked. The veteran smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We're going to remind this town what it means to protect the people who protected us." Behind him, the other veterans were climbing off their bikes, gathering on the sidewalk, looking up at Eleanor's porch with eyes full of purpose. Valor stood. His tail wagged once, twice. Then he walked down the steps and moved among them, accepting their hands on his head, their whispered thanks, their tears falling onto his gray fur. Eleanor watched from her porch, one hand pressed against her heart. She'd thought the video was the beginning. She was wrong. This was the beginning. And it was going to change everything. What exactly were the veterans planning? How did Valor's past connect to the mayor's own family? And what would happen when the people of Hawthorne Bend finally came face to face with the man who'd struck their beloved teacher? The video hit 10 million views at 3:47 a.m. Destiny Carter couldn't sleep. She sat cross-legged on her bed, phone clutched in both hands, watching the numbers climb like a fever chart. 10 million. Then 11. Then 12. Comments flooded in faster than she could read them. Thousands per minute. Angry faces. Crying faces. Fists raised in digital rage. "Who is this monster? That poor woman. Someone needs to do something. Find him. Make him pay." The hashtag had evolved 3 times since yesterday. First it was Justice for Eleanor. Then it became Protect Our Elders. Now it was something new, something that made Destiny's stomach tighten every time she saw it. Hawthorne Bend rises. She scrolled through the comments section. Names she recognized. Names she didn't. People from Ohio. People from California. People from countries she'd never heard of, all unified by 47 seconds of footage shot on a Thursday morning in a bakery. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Go to sleep, Destiny. School tomorrow." She typed back, "Can't. Too much happening." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "I'm proud of you." Destiny stared at those 4 words until her vision blurred. She hadn't felt proud when she'd recorded the video. She'd felt scared. Helpless. Ashamed of her own paralysis while an old woman got slapped 3 feet away. But something had shifted in the hours since. The video wasn't just a document of her failure anymore. It was evidence. Proof. A weapon that millions of people were now using to demand accountability. She'd done something, even if it wasn't enough. Even if it was too late. Maybe that's what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear. Not the perfect response in the perfect moment. Just doing what you could with what you had. Her phone buzzed again. Not her mother this time. A news alert. Breaking. Identity of bakery assault suspect confirmed as real estate developer Derek Halvorson. Multiple business partners announce termination of contracts. Destiny clicked the link. Read the article. Then read it again. Derek Halvorson. The name meant nothing to her personally, but it meant everything to Hawthorne Bend. The waterfront development. The new condominiums. The transformation that half the town wanted and the other half dreaded. All of it was connected to this man. And now all of it was falling apart. She scrolled down to the comments. More rage. More demands for justice. But also something else. Something new. Dozens of them. To other stories. Other complaints. Other people who'd crossed paths with Derek Halvorson and come away damaged. A contractor who'd never been paid for 6 months of work. A family who'd lost their home to one of his shell companies. A former employee who'd filed a harassment complaint that had somehow disappeared from official records. The video had cracked something open. And now everything Derek Halvorson had buried was climbing out into the light. Destiny set down her phone. Walked to her window. Looked out at the quiet streets of Hawthorne Bend. Somewhere out there, a 78-year-old woman was probably asleep in her bed, a war dog curled at her feet. Somewhere out there, a powerful man was watching his empire crumble. Somewhere out there, a town was waking up to something it hadn't felt in a long time. Destiny didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know how this story would end. But she knew one thing for certain. She was part of it now. Whether she was ready or not. 6 hours later, the sun rose over Hawthorne Bend, and everything changed. The first sign was the motorcycles. They'd been parked outside Eleanor Whitcomb's house all night, a protective ring of chrome and leather and military patches. The second sign was the crowd gathering on Main Street. Not protesters exactly. Just people. Standing together. Waiting. The third sign was the news vans. 4 of them by 8 a.m. Then 8. Then 12. Satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking electronic sun. By 9 a.m., Hawthorne Bend was the most talked about small town in America. And Derek Halvorson was nowhere to be found. His office was dark. His SUV was missing from the parking lot. His assistant had stopped answering calls. Reporters knocked on his penthouse door. No response. Police checked his usual restaurants. Empty chairs at empty tables. Someone claimed to have seen him at a gas station heading toward Columbus. Someone else swore he was hiding in a hotel near the airport. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. Derek Halvorson was sitting in his car behind an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, watching the news on his phone, and trying not to throw up. His lawyers had called 7 times. His investors had called 12 times. His ex-wife had called once, just to laugh. Everything was gone. The development deals. The political connections. The carefully constructed image of a successful businessman who got things done. Gone. All of it. Because of 47 seconds and one stupid, impulsive moment in a bakery. He'd hit an old woman. He kept telling himself it wasn't that bad. He'd barely touched her. She'd been in his way. She'd looked at him with those steady gray eyes like she was better than him. But the video didn't lie. The video showed exactly what he'd done. And now the whole world had seen it. Derek's phone buzzed again. Another news alert. Mayor Rowe calls emergency town meeting. We will not tolerate this kind of behavior in our community. He clicked the link. Read the details. A town meeting at 7 p.m. in the high school gymnasium. Open to the public. All citizens encouraged to attend. Derek knew what that meant. A public execution. Not literal, but close enough. They would stand at microphones and denounce him. They would demand justice. They would turn him into a symbol of everything wrong with the world. And then what? Arrest? Lawsuits? Financial ruin? All of the above? He could run. He had money in offshore accounts. Properties in places that didn't extradite. He could disappear, start over, become someone new. But that would mean admitting defeat. That would mean letting them win. Derek Halvorson had never let anyone win. Not once in his entire life. He looked at his phone. At the video. At the face of the old woman he'd struck. Eleanor Whitcomb. The name was everywhere now. Her story. Her life. The 42 years she'd spent teaching children to read. The grandson she'd lost in Afghanistan. The dog that had saved soldiers overseas. She was a hero. A saint. The embodiment of everything good and decent about small-town America. And he was the monster who'd attacked her. Derek's jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists. If they wanted a monster, he'd give them one. He started his car. Pulled out of the abandoned lot. Headed toward Main Street. He had a few hours to prepare. A few hours to figure out how to turn this around. Because Derek Halvorsen didn't lose. He didn't give up. He didn't let other people define his story. He wrote his own endings. And this one wasn't over yet. By noon, the crowd on Main Street had tripled. By 3 p.m., it had tripled again. They came from everywhere. Hawthorne Bend. Neighboring towns. Cities hours away. Strangers united by a video and a hashtag and a shared sense of outrage. They carried signs. Protect our elders. Bullies never win. Hawthorne Bend stands with Eleanor. They chanted slogans. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? They hugged each other and cried and told stories about teachers who'd changed their lives, grandmothers who'd shaped their souls, small acts of kindness that had rippled outward across decades. News cameras captured everything. Reporters interviewed everyone. Social media exploded with images and videos and live streams. Hawthorne Bend had become a symbol. A flashpoint. A place where millions of people projected their own anger about bullies and powerful men and a world that too often protected the wrong people. And at the center of it all, in a small house on Maple Street, Eleanor Whitcomb made tea and wondered what she'd started. The veterans were still outside. They'd set up chairs on her lawn, formed a perimeter, politely but firmly turned away anyone who tried to approach without invitation. Valor moved among them like a general inspecting his troops. His tail wagged. His eyes were bright. For the first time since Caleb's death, something had awakened in him. A sense of purpose. A reason to keep fighting. Eleanor watched through her window. Watched the old soldiers stroke his fur and whisper to him and wipe their eyes when they thought no one was looking. They knew. They all knew what he'd done. The men he'd saved. The fire he'd run through. The handler he'd tried so desperately to protect. Her phone rang. She answered without checking the caller ID. Mrs. Whitcomb? A woman's voice. Professional but warm. This is Rachel Torres from CNN. We'd like to interview you for our evening broadcast. Would you be willing to? No, Eleanor said gently. But thank you for asking. She hung up. The phone rang again immediately. A different network this time. She hung up again. This happened 6 more times before she stopped answering. She didn't want to be famous. Didn't want to be a symbol. Didn't want her face on television screens across the country. She just wanted peace. Quiet. The ordinary life she'd built over 78 years. But that life was gone now. Changed forever by 47 seconds in a bakery. There was a knock at her back door. Different from the others. 3 short taps. A code she recognized. She walked through her kitchen. Opened the door. Franklin Rose stood on her back porch. He looked older than he had yesterday. Tired. May I come in? He asked. She stepped aside. Let him pass. They sat at her kitchen table. The same table where she'd sat with Destiny the day before. The same table where she'd graded papers and written lesson plans and eaten solitary dinners after Robert died. Franklin didn't speak right away. He just looked at her. At the fading bruise on her cheek. At the lines around her eyes that seemed deeper than before. I'm sorry, he finally said. For what? For all of this. He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the crowd, toward the chaos consuming the town. I made it worse. Confronting him. Shutting down his projects. I should have talked to you first. Eleanor reached across the table. Took his hand. You were protecting me. The way you always have. The way I taught you to protect the people you love. Franklin's eyes filled with tears. You shouldn't have to go through this. The cameras. The reporters. The whole world watching. No, Eleanor agreed. I shouldn't. But here we are. She squeezed his hand. What happens tonight? At the meeting? Franklin pulled in a breath. People will speak. They'll share their anger, their stories, their demands. He paused. And then we'll decide, as a community, what to do next. And Derek Halvorson? He's disappeared. No one knows where he is. Eleanor nodded slowly. She'd expected as much. He'll come back, she said. Franklin looked at her. How do you know? Because I've seen boys like him before. In my classroom. On playgrounds. In the hallways of schools where I spent my entire career. Her voice hardened. They don't run. Not permanently. Their pride won't let them. She released Franklin's hand. Stood up. Walked to the window. He'll come back because he needs to prove something. To himself. To the world. To me. Outside, the veterans were laughing about something. Valor's bark cut through the afternoon air. When he comes, Eleanor said, I'll be ready. Franklin stood. Joined her at the window. What are you going to do? Eleanor turned to face him. Her eyes were steady. Unafraid. I'm going to teach him one final lesson. The town meeting started at 7 p.m. sharp. The high school gymnasium was packed to capacity. Standing room only. People spilling out into hallways and parking lots, watching on phones that live-streamed the proceedings. Franklin Rose stood at a podium beneath a basketball hoop. His voice echoed through a sound system that crackled with the strain of so many people. He talked about community, about values, about what Hawthorne Bend stood for and what it refused to tolerate. He talked about Eleanor Whitcomb, about her 42 years of service, about the generations of children she'd shaped into adults. He talked about accountability, about justice, about the power of people coming together to say enough is enough. The crowd cheered. The crowd cried. The crowd raised their voices in a chorus of shared conviction. And then the gymnasium doors burst open. Derek Halvorson walked in alone. He was wearing the same leather jacket from the video, the same white button-down shirt, the same expression of casual contempt. But his eyes were different. Desperate. The eyes of a man with nothing left to lose. The crowd went silent. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. Derek walked toward the podium. Security guards moved to intercept him. He held up his hands. I just want to talk, he said. His voice carried across the silent gymnasium. Don't I get to tell my side? Franklin's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the podium. Mr. Halvorson, this isn't. Isn't what? Fair? Democratic? I thought this was America. I thought everyone got a voice. Derek reached the edge of the stage, climbed the steps, faced the crowd. You all saw that video, he said. You all decided I was guilty. But did anyone ask what happened before the camera started rolling? Did anyone ask why I was upset? Did anyone ask what that old woman did to provoke me? A rumble moved through the crowd. Anger building. Derek smiled. He was enjoying this. The attention. The outrage. The power of having every eye in the room fixed on him. She was in my way, he continued. I asked her to move. Politely. Multiple times. And she just stood there, looking at me with those self-righteous eyes, like she was better than me. He spread his hands. So yes, I pushed her. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I lost my temper. But that video only shows one side. It doesn't show the disrespect. It doesn't show the provocation. It doesn't show. It shows enough. The voice came from the back of the gymnasium, quiet but clear, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. The crowd parted. Eleanor Whitcomb walked forward. Valor moved at her side. Her eyes never left Derek's face. She climbed the stage steps, stood facing him, 5 feet apart. The whole world held its breath. What would Eleanor say to the man who'd struck her? What would Derek do when confronted with the woman he'd tried to destroy? And what truth was about to be revealed that would change everything? Eleanor Whitcomb stood 5 feet from the man who'd slapped her. The gymnasium lights caught the fading bruise on her cheek. Yellow and purple now, like a sunset painted on skin. Her wire-rimmed glasses sat perfectly straight. Her powder blue cardigan was buttoned to the top. She looked exactly like what she was. A 78-year-old retired teacher who'd spent her life in service to children she would never see again. Derek Halvorson towered over her. 6'2", 200 pounds. A man who'd built his career on intimidation and aggression. But his hands were shaking. Mrs. Whitcomb. He tried to make his voice sound strong, confident. It came out thin and hollow. I was just explaining to everyone that. I know what you were explaining. Eleanor's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The gymnasium's acoustics carried every syllable to every ear. You were explaining that I provoked you. That I deserved what happened. That there were circumstances the video didn't capture. She took a step forward. Tell me, Mr. Halvorson, what circumstances would justify a grown man striking an elderly woman in a bakery? Derek's mouth opened. Opened again. The video doesn't show. The video shows everything that matters. Eleanor's voice hardened. It shows a man who believes his time is more valuable than other people's dignity. It shows a man who uses violence when he doesn't get what he wants. It shows a man who has never, in his entire life, been held accountable for his actions. She looked out at the crowd. At the faces she'd taught. The children she'd shaped. The community she'd served for more than half a century. I've known men like you, Mr. Halvorson. I've had them in my classroom. Boys who took what they wanted. Boys who hurt smaller children when no one was watching. Boys who believed the world owed them something simply because they existed. She turned back to Derek. Some of those boys changed. With patience. With guidance. With someone who refused to give up on them. Her voice softened, just slightly. Our mayor was one of those boys. He couldn't read when he came to my classroom. He was angry and scared and convinced he was worthless. Franklin Rowe wiped his eyes. I spent 6 months with him after school. Every single day. Sounding out letters. Celebrating small victories. Refusing to let him quit. Eleanor's voice cracked. And now look at him. A leader. A husband. A father. A man who cares about his community. The crowd murmured. Nodded. Remembered. Eleanor faced Derek again. That's what I do, Mr. Halvorson. That's what I've always done. I help people become better versions of themselves. I see the potential in everyone, even the ones who seem most lost. She paused. Let the silence stretch. But some boys don't change. They grow into men who still take what they want. Men who still hurt people when no one is watching. Men who build empires on intimidation and never once consider the wreckage they leave behind. Her voice dropped even lower. I think you're one of those men. Derek's face had gone pale. His confident mask was completely gone. Something raw and ugly churned beneath the surface. You don't know anything about me, he spat. You're just some old teacher in a nothing town. You've never built anything. Never accomplished anything. Never. I've built something you can never buy. Eleanor's voice cut through his words like a knife. I've built relationships. I've built generations of children who remember my name and carry my lessons in their hearts. She gestured to the crowd. These people know me. They remember sitting in my classroom. They remember the birthday cards I sent and the lunches I bought and the hours I spent helping them believe in themselves. Her eyes bored into Derek's. What do you have, Mr. Halvorson? Money? Power? Buildings with your name on them? She shook her head. All of that can disappear in an instant. All of that is disappearing right now. And when it's gone, what will be left? Derek opened his mouth to respond. He never got the chance. A commotion near the gymnasium doors. Voices raised. Security guards moving. Then a man in a military uniform pushed through the crowd. Gray-haired, metal-covered, walking with the precision of someone who'd spent decades in service to his country. He climbed the stage steps. Stopped beside Eleanor. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. His voice was formal, official. I'm Colonel James Hartley, United States Army, retired. Commander of the unit your grandson served in. Eleanor's hand found his arm. I know who you are, Colonel. James Hartley turned to face the crowd. His eyes swept the gymnasium like a commander surveying troops. Most of you have seen the video of what happened in the bakery. What you haven't seen is another video. One that was classified until 6 hours ago. He pulled out a tablet. Tap the screen. The Pentagon declassified this footage at my request. They agreed it was time for the world to know what really happened in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The gymnasium's projector flickered to life. A grainy image appeared on the screen behind the basketball hoop. Desert. Mountains. A convoy of military vehicles moving through a narrow valley. Then gunfire. The crowd gasped. Children covered their ears. Parents pulled them close. On screen, chaos erupted. Soldiers scrambling for cover. Bullets kicking up dust. Men falling and not getting back up. And then, emerging from the smoke, a dog. Felt younger, stronger, but unmistakably the same German shepherd now sitting at Eleanor's feet. The footage showed everything. Valor dragging the first soldier to safety. Running back through enemy fire. Getting hit. Stumbling. Keeping going. It showed him pulling the second soldier. Then the third. It showed Caleb Whitcomb, pinned behind a boulder, his hand reaching out to grab Valor's collar as the dog collapsed beside him. It showed the helicopter arriving. Medics rushing forward. Soldiers lifting stretchers. And then it stopped. The gymnasium was silent. Not a sound except for the soft crying of people who just witnessed something they couldn't unsee. Colonel Hartley set down the tablet. 3 men are alive today because of that dog. One of them is my nephew. Franklin Rowe's nephew. The crowd stirred. Whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. Franklin's face had gone white. He hadn't known. None of them had known. My nephew never told anyone, Hartley continued. He was ashamed of needing rescue. Ashamed of the men who died while he survived. He carries that guilt every single day. He turned to face Derek. You struck a woman whose grandson died saving American soldiers. You threatened a dog who pulled wounded men out of hell. You called them nobodies who should learn to stay out of your way. His voice hardened into steel. Those nobodies have given more to this country than you could ever understand. And you're standing here, in front of cameras and crowds, trying to justify what you did. Derek's mouth worked. No sound came out. The colonel stepped closer. I've commanded men in combat, Mr. Halvorsen. I've seen courage and I've seen cowardice. And I know exactly which one you represent. He turned back to the crowd. This woman lost her grandson. She took in his dog. She spent the last 3 years caring for an animal traumatized by war, giving him the love and peace he deserved after everything he'd been through. His voice cracked. And when that dog saw a threat to the woman who'd saved him, he was ready to fight again. Ready to protect her the way he'd protected my nephew and all those other soldiers. Hartley faced Eleanor. Mrs. Whitcomb, on behalf of the United States Army, on behalf of everyone who's ever served, and on behalf of my nephew who can't be here tonight, thank you. He saluted. Eleanor's hand trembled as she returned it. The crowd erupted. Applause. Cheers. People rising to their feet in a standing ovation that shook the gymnasium walls. Derek Halvorsen stood alone at the center of the stage. His face was gray. His eyes were hollow. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd believed about himself. Everything he'd used to justify his behavior. Gone. Destroyed by 47 seconds of video and a truth he could never have anticipated. The applause continued. Swelled. Became something more than noise. It became a verdict. Guilty. Not in a court of law. Not with lawyers and evidence and formal proceedings. But in the court that mattered most. The court of public opinion. The court of human decency. The court of a community that had finally found the courage to say enough. Derek stumbled backward. Reached the edge of the stage. Almost fell down the steps. No one helped him. No one even looked at him. He was invisible now. A ghost of the man he'd been. A cautionary tale that parents would tell their children for generations. Don't be like Derek Halvorsen. Don't let power corrupt you. Don't forget that everyone deserves dignity. He made it to the gymnasium doors. Pushed through. Disappeared into the night. Behind him, the applause continued. And Eleanor Whitcomb stood at the center of it all, one hand on Valor's head, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She'd wanted to teach Derek Halvorsen a lesson. She hadn't expected to learn one herself. What would happen to Derek now that his empire had crumbled? What would Eleanor say when she finally had a chance to speak? And what truth was she about to share that would bring even the strongest people in that gymnasium to their knees? The gymnasium doors slammed shut behind Derek Halvorsen at 8:47 p.m. Nobody followed him. Nobody cared where he went. The applause that had driven him from the stage continued for 3 full minutes. It rolled through the crowd like thunder, building and releasing, until finally it faded into something else. Silence. Expectant. Heavy with emotion. Eleanor Whitcomb stood at the podium. Valor sat beside her, his gray muzzle resting on his paws, his eyes watching the crowd with the calm alertness of a soldier who'd seen worse than this. Franklin Rowe approached her, touched her arm gently. "Do you want to say anything?" he asked. His voice was thick. Eleanor looked out at the faces filling the gymnasium. So many faces. Young and old. Familiar and strange. All of them looking at her with something that made her chest tighten. That's what it was. Hope mixed with love, mixed with the kind of respect that couldn't be bought or demanded. She leaned toward the microphone. "I had a speech prepared," she said. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. 3 pages. Double-spaced. About dignity and accountability and the importance of standing up for what's right. A small laugh rippled through the crowd. "But I'm not going to give that speech tonight." She paused, looked down at Valor, then back up at the people who'd filled this room for her. "Instead, I want to tell you a story about a boy named Caleb." The gymnasium went completely still. Caleb came to live with me when he was 7 years old. His parents, my son-in-law and daughter, died in a car accident on a rainy October night. One moment they were driving home from a movie. The next moment they were gone. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. Caleb didn't cry at the funeral. He just stood there, holding my hand, staring at 2 coffins that held everything he'd ever known. 7 years old, and already he understood that life could take everything from you without warning. She gripped the podium. I raised him the best I could, taught him to read and write and think, watched him grow from a scared little boy into a young man who wanted to serve his country. Her eyes found the veterans scattered throughout the crowd. The men and women who'd served beside her grandson. When Caleb enlisted, I was terrified. Every parent and grandparent who sent a child to war knows that fear. The phone calls you dread. The knocks on the door that stop your heart. The endless nights wondering if they're safe. She swallowed hard. Caleb wrote me letters. Every week. Told me about his unit. His friends. The dog who'd become his partner and his brother and his reason for smiling in a place where smiles were hard to find. Eleanor looked down at Valor. That dog is sitting beside me right now. He's old. He's tired. He carries scars that will never fully heal. But he's still here. Still protecting. Still loyal. She knelt down. Wrapped her arms around Valor's neck. The dog's tail thumped once against the stage floor. When Caleb died, Eleanor whispered into the microphone, "I thought I'd lost everything. My grandson. My purpose. My reason to keep going." She stood slowly. Her knees protested. Her heart ached. But then the army called. They told me about Valor. About what he'd done. About the men he'd saved and the fire he'd run through and the wounds he'd suffered trying to protect the soldiers he loved. Her voice strengthened. They asked if I wanted to adopt him. Give him a home. Help him heal. She looked at the crowd. I said yes before they finished asking. Not because I needed a pet. Not because I was lonely. But because that dog was the last living piece of my grandson. The last thing Caleb had touched. The last thing that had heard his voice and felt his hand and shared his final moments. Tears were streaming down faces throughout the gymnasium. Veterans wiped their eyes with rough hands. Parents clutched their children closer. For 3 years, Valor and I have taken care of each other. He protects me. I feed him and brush him and tell him stories about the little boy who grew up to be a hero. Eleanor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. When that man struck me in the bakery, Valor was ready to attack. Ready to fight. Ready to do what he'd been trained to do in Afghanistan. She paused. But I told him to stay. Because I knew what would happen if he didn't. They would take him away from me. Put him down. Destroy the last piece of Caleb I have left. The gymnasium was absolutely silent. So I stood there. I took that slap. I let that man walk away. Because protecting Valor was more important than protecting myself. Eleanor straightened her spine. Lifted her chin. That's what love does. It makes you sacrifice. It makes you endure. It makes you strong in ways you never knew you could be. She looked directly into the nearest camera. I'm not a hero. I'm not a symbol. I'm just an old woman who loved a little boy who grew up to love a dog who saved lives I'll never know. Her voice rang through the gymnasium. But I do know this. Kindness matters. Dignity matters. Standing up for the people who can't stand up for themselves matters. She gestured to the crowd. You came here tonight because you were angry. Because you saw something wrong and you wanted to make it right. That's good. That's human. That's exactly what we should feel when we witness injustice. Her tone shifted. But anger fades. Outrage burns out. The cameras will leave. The hashtags will change. The world will move on to the next story, the next scandal, the next video that makes everyone feel something for 47 seconds. She leaned into the microphone. Don't let that happen. Don't let this moment be just another moment. Take the anger you feel right now and turn it into something lasting. Something real. Her eyes swept the crowd. Call your grandparents. Visit your teachers. Thank the people who shaped you into who you are. Tell them they mattered. Tell them they made a difference. Tell them before it's too late. Eleanor's voice broke. Because I can't tell Caleb anymore. I can't hug him or hear his laugh or read his letters. All I have is an old dog and a lifetime of memories and the hope that somewhere, somehow, he knows I'm still here. Still fighting. Still loving. She stepped back from the podium. That's all I have to say. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then the gymnasium exploded. Not with applause this time. With something deeper. Something raw. People were standing. Moving toward the stage. Reaching out their hands toward the old woman and her dog. They came in waves. Former students now in their 50s and 60s, crying as they thanked her for believing in them. Young parents holding children, asking her to bless them somehow. Veterans in old uniforms, saluting her and Valor with tears running down their weathered faces. Franklin Rowe stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his own tears falling freely. You changed their lives, he said. All of them. Eleanor watched the stream of people approaching. So many faces. So many stories. I just did my job, she whispered. Franklin shook his head. No. You did so much more. The line of people stretched to the back of the gymnasium and out the doors. They would be there for hours. All night, if necessary. And Eleanor Whitcomb stood at the center of it all, one hand on Valor's head, accepting the love she'd given away for 42 years as it finally came flowing back. But the story wasn't over yet. Because outside the gymnasium, Derek Halvorsen was sitting in his car, watching the news on his phone, and making a decision that would determine the final chapter of this story. What would Derek do now that he'd lost everything? Would he run? Or finally accept responsibility for what he'd done? And what would Eleanor say if he ever found the courage to face her again? Derek Halvorsen's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He sat in his car in the high school parking lot, watching the glow from the gymnasium windows, listening to the muffled sounds of a town that had turned against him. His phone showed the damage. News articles with his face. Stock tickers showing his company's collapse. Messages from lawyers and investors and former friends, all saying variations of the same thing. You're finished. He should run. He knew that. Should start his car and drive away and never look back. There were places he could go. Money he could access. Ways to disappear and start over. But his hands stayed on the steering wheel. His feet stayed on the floorboards. His eyes stayed fixed on those glowing windows. Something was holding him here. Something he couldn't name or understand. The gymnasium doors opened. People began streaming out. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Still wiping their eyes. Still clutching each other. Still radiating the kind of collective emotion that Derek had never experienced in his entire life. He watched them walk past his car. None of them looked at him. None of them recognized the man behind the tinted windows. That was good. But then he saw her. Eleanor Whitcomb emerged from the gymnasium with Valor at her side and Franklin Rowe holding her arm. The veterans formed a protective ring around her, their weathered faces soft with something that looked like worship. Derek's stomach churned. He'd built skyscrapers. Closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Negotiated with senators and governors and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. But he'd never inspired anything like what he was watching right now. That old woman had something he didn't. Something money couldn't buy and power couldn't take. Something that made people line up for hours just to shake her hand. What was it? What did she have that he didn't? The question burned in his mind as he watched her make her way through the crowd. Patient. Graceful. Stopping to speak with everyone who approached. She didn't look angry. Didn't look vindictive. Didn't look like someone who'd just destroyed his life. She looked at peace. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to hate her. Wanted to blame her for everything that had happened. She'd been in his way that morning. She'd looked at him with those steady eyes. She'd refused to move when he'd told her to move. If she'd just stepped aside, none of this would have happened. But even as the thought formed, Derek knew it was a lie. The fault wasn't hers. It had never been hers. The fault was his. He'd struck an old woman because she'd dared to exist in his path. He'd humiliated her because humiliating people made him feel powerful. He'd walked away laughing because he genuinely believed there would be no consequences. That's who he was. That's who he'd always been. A bully. A coward. A man who'd spent his entire life taking from others and never once considering the damage he left behind. Derek's eyes burned. Something wet rolled down his cheek. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Maybe when his father died. Maybe before that. Crying was weakness, his father had taught him. Crying was for losers. Winners sucked it up and kept moving. But Derek wasn't moving. He was sitting in his car in a high school parking lot, watching an old woman receive the love of an entire community, and crying like he hadn't cried in 30 years. The crowd was thinning now. The veterans were helping Eleanor toward a waiting car. Franklin Rowe was shaking hands with the colonel who'd shown the combat footage. This was it. Derek's last chance to run. His last chance to escape before someone recognized him. He opened his car door. He didn't know why. Didn't know what he was going to say or do. His body was moving on its own, propelled by something he couldn't control. He walked toward the gymnasium, toward the old woman, toward the moment that would define the rest of his life. A veteran spotted him first. The recognition was instant. The man's face hardened. His hand went to the shoulder of the soldier beside him. Word spread through the group like wildfire. Bodies shifted, formed a wall, protected the woman they'd come to honor. Derek stopped 10 feet away. "I just want to talk to her," he said. His voice came out rough, broken. Nothing like the confident bark he'd used that morning in the bakery. The veterans didn't move. Then Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "Let him through." The soldiers hesitated, exchanged looks. But they obeyed. Derek walked through the gap they'd created. Each step felt like walking through water. Heavy. Resistant. His heart pounded in his chest. He stopped 3 feet from Eleanor Whitcomb. She looked up at him. Same steady gray eyes. Same quiet dignity. Same absolute lack of fear. Valor was at her feet. The dog's ears were forward. His body was tense. But he didn't growl. Didn't bare his teeth. He just watched. Waited. "Mr. Halvorson." Eleanor's voice was neutral. Neither warm nor cold. "What do you want?" Derek opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He'd planned speeches in his head. Justifications. Explanations. Arguments that would prove he wasn't the monster everyone thought he was. But standing here, looking into her eyes, all of that seemed pointless. "I'm sorry." The words came out before he could stop them. Bruh. Honest in a way he hadn't been honest in years. Eleanor studied him. Searched his face for something. Truth maybe. Or sincerity. Or just the measure of the man standing before her. "Why?" she asked. "Because." Derek's voice caught. "Because I was wrong. Because I hurt you. Because I've spent my whole life hurting people and pretending it didn't matter. His hands were shaking again. Worse than before. I watched you in there. On the stage. Talking about your grandson. About the dog. About 42 years of teaching children who weren't even yours. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You have something I don't have. Something I've never had. People love you. Actually love you. Not because of what you can do for them. Not because they're afraid of you. Just because of who you are. His voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know how to be like that. I've never known. My father taught me that power was all that mattered. That people were tools to be used. That kindness was weakness. He met her eyes. I believed him. My whole life I believed him. And now I'm standing in a parking lot, watching my whole world fall apart, and I realize I have nothing. No one who would stand up for me the way those people stood up for you. No one who would cry for me. No one who would even notice if I disappeared. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. The veterans watched. The cameras watched. The whole world, it seemed, was watching. Finally, she spoke. Apologies are words, Mr. Halvorsen. Easy to say. Hard to mean. Derek nodded. I know. If you're truly sorry, prove it. Not to me. To the people you've hurt throughout your career. The contractors you didn't pay. The families you displaced. The employees you mistreated. Her voice hardened. Go to them. One by one. Look them in the eyes and tell them what you just told me. Make amends. Not with money, though they deserve that too. With genuine acknowledgement of the harm you've caused. She stepped closer. That's what accountability looks like. Not grand gestures. Not public apologies designed to rehabilitate your image. Just honest, difficult work. Person by person. Day by day. For as long as it takes. Derek swallowed hard. And if I do that? If I actually change? Eleanor's expression softened. Just slightly. Then maybe, someday, you'll know what it feels like to be loved for who you are instead of feared for what you can do. She reached out. Touched his arm. I've spent my whole life believing that people can change. That even the most lost souls can find their way back. I believed it about the troubled children in my classroom. I believe it about you. Her eyes held his. Don't prove me wrong. Derek stood frozen. The touch of her hand on his arm burned like fire and soothed like cool water at the same time. No one had ever believed in him before. Not like this. Not without conditions or expectations or hidden agendas. I won't, he whispered. I promise. Eleanor released his arm. Subject. Then go. Start tonight. There's a man named Marcus Thompson who did electrical work on your waterfront development. You owe him $93,000. His address is on file with your company. Derek blinked. How do you know that? A small smile crossed Eleanor's face. Teachers know everything, Mr. Halvorsen. We always have. She turned and walked toward the waiting car. Valor padded beside her. The veterans closed ranks behind her. Derek stood alone in the parking lot. The cameras were still rolling. The world was still watching. But something had shifted. Something had broken. Something had been rebuilt. He pulled out his phone. Searched for Marcus Thompson. Found an address on the east side of town. It was almost midnight. Too late for a visit. But morning would come. And with it, the first day of a very different kind of life. Derek walked back to his car. Started the engine. He didn't know if he could change. Didn't know if Eleanor was right about him. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to try. And sometimes, that's how redemption begins. Would Derek actually follow through on his promise? Would the town of Hawthorne Bend ever forgive him? And what would Eleanor's final lesson teach everyone about the power of second chances? The bell above Briarwood Bakery chimed at exactly 8:15 a.m. 1 week had passed since the slap that changed everything. 7 days since a video went viral and a town rose up and a man's empire crumbled into dust. Eleanor Whitcomb walked through the door with Valor at her side. Same powder blue cardigan. Same wire-rimmed glasses. Same measured steps that had carried her through this doorway every Thursday morning for more than a decade. The bakery fell silent. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. every eye fixed on the woman who'd become the most famous resident Hawthorne Bend had ever known. Then Melissa, the young clerk who'd stood frozen behind the counter that terrible morning, did something unexpected. She started clapping. Others joined her. The man in the booth who'd watched without helping. The customers scattered around the room. Even the baker himself, emerging from the back with flour-dusted hands. They clapped for Eleanor Whitcomb. For valor. For the quiet dignity that had inspired millions of people around the world. Eleanor raised her hand. Gentle. Patient. The same gesture she'd used 1,000 times to calm excited third graders. The applause faded. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I'm just here for my usual." Melissa wiped her eyes. "Apple fritter and black coffee? Please." The bakery slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Coffee was poured. Pastries were selected and wrapped in wax paper. Eleanor took her usual seat by the window. Valor settled at her feet. The morning light streamed in, warm and golden, catching dust particles suspended in air that smelled like fresh bread and possibility. A young woman approached her table. Different from the others. More hesitant. More uncertain. "Mrs. Whitcomb? I'm sorry to bother you, but—" Eleanor looked up. "Yes. My name is Jessica. I was in your third grade class. Room 104. 23 years ago." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Recognition. Memory. "Jessica Palmer. You sat in the second row. You had trouble with long division, but you wrote the most beautiful poems." Jessica's face crumpled. "You remember?" "I remember all of them." Jessica slid into the seat across from Eleanor. Her hands were trembling. "I came here today because I saw the video. And I saw your speech at the town meeting. And I realized I never told you." She paused. Gathered herself. "You saved my life, Mrs. Whitcomb. My parents were getting divorced that year. I was angry and scared and I thought nobody cared about me. But you kept me after school sometimes. Let me help you clean erasers. Told me I was special." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm a teacher now. 4th grade. Because of you. Because you showed me that one person can make a difference." Eleanor reached across the table. Took Jessica's hands in her own. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." They sat together for a while. 2 teachers. 2 women. 2 lives connected by a classroom and a kindness that had rippled across decades. Similar scenes played out throughout the week. Throughout the month. Throughout the rest of Eleanor's life. People came from everywhere. Former students. Parents of former students. Strangers who'd seen the video and felt moved to make their own pilgrimages to Hawthorne Bend. They told Eleanor their stories. Thanked her for her service. Left flowers on her porch and cards in her mailbox and donations to charities in her name. The video had been viewed more than 200 million times. Hashtags had been created and retired and replaced by new ones. News cycles had moved on to fresh scandals and breaking stories. But the impact remained. Teachers across the country reported receiving thank you notes from former students. Elderly citizens reported being treated with more patience, more kindness, more respect. Bullies in schoolyards were being called out by classmates who'd learned that silence was also a choice. Something had shifted in the culture. Something small but real. A reminder that how we treat each other matters. That the powerful don't always win. That dignity is not reserved for the young and strong and wealthy. Derek Halvorson kept his promise. He started with Marcus Thompson, the electrician. Showed up at his door with a certified check and an apology that took 30 minutes to deliver. Then he moved on to the next person. And the next. And the next. It took him 8 months to visit everyone he'd wronged. 8 months of difficult conversations and slammed doors and tears shed by people who'd waited years for acknowledgement of their pain. His company was gone. His reputation was destroyed. His fortune had dwindled to a fraction of what it had been. But something else was growing in its place. A foundation, funded by what remained of his wealth, dedicated to supporting elderly abuse victims and underpaid teachers and military families who'd lost loved ones in service to their country. He named it the Whitcomb Foundation. Eleanor protested. Said she didn't deserve such an honor. said there were better names, more worthy causes, more deserving recipients. Derek insisted. You believed in me, he told her. When no one else did. When I didn't believe in myself. You looked at a monster and saw something worth saving. Eleanor had smiled at that. I didn't see a monster. I saw a lost boy who'd never learned how to be good. There's a difference. They weren't friends. Would never be friends. The wound between them was too deep for casual healing. But they'd reached an understanding. A truce. A mutual recognition that people could change, could grow, could become better versions of themselves if given the chance. Valor lived another 2 years. Good years. Peaceful years. Filled with walks through the town he'd helped transform and naps on the porch where veterans still came to pay their respects. He died on a Tuesday morning in April, his head resting on Eleanor's lap, his old eyes finally closing for the last time. The whole town mourned. Flags flew at half-staff. Schools held moments of silence. Veterans in uniform lined the streets as his small coffin was carried to a plot in the cemetery beside Caleb's grave. Eleanor spoke at his funeral. Brief words. Simple words. About loyalty and sacrifice and the bond between a soldier and his dog. He protected us all, she said. In life and in death. He reminded us what courage looks like. What love looks like. What it means to never give up on the people we care about. She placed a medal on his grave. The same medal Colonel Hartley had brought that night on her porch. Rest now, old friend. Caleb is waiting for you. The years passed. Eleanor taught no more classes, but she never stopped teaching. She spoke at schools and conferences and graduation ceremonies. She wrote letters to children struggling in classrooms across the country. She answered every piece of fan mail, even when her arthritis made holding a pen almost impossible. The video continued to circulate. New generations discovered it. New movements cited it as inspiration. New conversations about respect and dignity and accountability traced their origins back to 47 seconds filmed on a Thursday morning in a small Ohio bakery. Eleanor Whitcomb died in her sleep at the age of 91. She went peacefully, surrounded by the photographs and letters and mementos of a life well lived. Her funeral drew thousands. Former students now in their 60s and 70s, weeping as they remembered the teacher who'd changed their lives. Politicians and celebrities and ordinary citizens, all united by respect for a woman who'd never sought fame but had found it anyway. Franklin Rowe delivered the eulogy. He talked about a scared little boy who couldn't read. About afternoon lessons that changed everything. About a teacher who'd believed in him when no one else did. She gave me my life, he said, his voice breaking. She gave all of us our lives. And the only way we can repay her is to do for others what she did for us. He looked out at the crowd. Be patient with children. Be kind to elders. Stand up for the voiceless. And never, ever stop believing that people can change. He wiped his eyes. That's what Eleanor Whitcomb taught us. That's her legacy. And as long as we carry those lessons in our hearts, she'll never truly be gone. The service ended. The crowd dispersed. The cameras packed up and moved on. But in Hawthorne Bend, nothing was ever quite the same. Teachers were treated with more respect. Elderly citizens were treated with more care. Children grew up hearing stories about Mrs. Whitcomb and her dog, about a slap that started a revolution, about the power of standing up for what's right. And every Thursday morning, someone placed fresh flowers on a grave in the cemetery behind the Methodist church. No one knew who did it. No one asked. But the flowers were always there. Week after week. Year after year. A quiet tribute to a quiet woman who'd changed the world without ever meaning to. Because that's how the best teachers work. They plant seeds they'll never see bloom. They change lives they'll never fully know. They remind us, in ways both large and small, that kindness matters. That dignity matters. That every single person we meet is fighting battles we can't imagine. Eleanor Whitcomb understood that. And now, so do we. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the teachers who shaped you, or the elders who loved you, or the moments that changed everything, please take a moment to do something Eleanor would have wanted. Call someone who mattered to you. Thank them while you still can. Tell them they made a difference. Because we never know how many Thursdays we have left. And some lessons are too important to leave unspoken. Do you believe dogs understand the weight of protecting someone they love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a teacher who changed your life or an animal who showed you what loyalty really means. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that inspires. Every week, we share tales of courage, sacrifice, and the quiet heroes who make our world a better place. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life might be changed by 47 seconds of truth. Until next time, remember, kindness is never wasted. Dignity is always deserved. And the people who shape us are often the ones we forget to thank. Don't let today be another day of forgetting.